It's been 7 months since the Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs met to discuss a way forward for hundreds of refugees and asylum seekers who staged a sit-in at the UNHCR offices in Cape Town and then the Central Methodist Church. But still no workable solution has been found. Instead, an oversight inspection will take place on a date still to be determined. To tell us more, I'm joined by Home Affairs Minister Aaron Motsoaledi and JP Smith from the city of Cape Town. Minister and JP, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. So it's been 7 months of discussions in Parliament around these refugees, right? I mean, South Africans and these asylum seekers and refugees will wonder what's taking so long to find a solution. What seems to be the delay, Minister?
Shahan, that's a very, very funny question. To say the refugees are asking a question because they know very well. Firstly, let me start by saying, remember that Parliament on the 8th of March gave us and the city 30 days to come up with a plan about this. But that was overtaken by the disaster declaration. And immediately this disaster declaration was made, everything to, it actually took over everything. And when they were moved to the two areas where they were, it was under the disaster regulations. But your question that they are still waiting is very surprising, Shahan, because remember, they've been given choices. Number one, which everybody else and every stakeholder except themselves, every stakeholder supports, is the issue of reintegration back into communities where they come from or wherever they could be integrated. They insist that they must be taken to a third country. And even today, UN said that is not going to happen. It has been told to them many times, even through letters and even through meetings, some of which eNCA covered, that there's no way United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is going to take anybody in the manner that they are asking to a third world country. The third option is voluntary repatriation back to the countries where they come from. And many of them said they are taking none of those options. That's where we are. But it's very clear that after the disaster regulations, after the lockdown after the lockdown is gone, something will have to happen. They can't just stay there because they are staying under disaster regulations. Yeah. And I'm sure Mr. JP Smith will agree with me on that.
Yeah, so JP, let's talk a bit more about having to accommodate these refugees and asylum seekers in Bellville. And of course, I hear that Parliament was told today that they are a law unto themselves. How is that being allowed to happen, and what exactly does that mean?
So I think that we've got two sites, remember. We have the site at Wingfield where we agreed with Minister Motsoaledi that we would identify a site. That site was identified. It's part of the military's land. We created the first marquee tent there, and we were prevented by the military from putting up the second one. And then people were moved to Bellville. I'm not particularly keen in getting into the history of that. It's unnecessarily combative. But perhaps what is worthwhile saying is that Home Affairs is dealing with the tent at Bellville. We're keen to fold that one up as quickly as possible because it is currently obstructing the taxi rank. The taxis are meant to rank there, and the unavailability of that space is causing all manner of headache for us and conflict. The other site, Wingfield, we have staff present. There is water, sanitation, and other amenities. We're managing it as best we can. Unfortunately, Mr. Balus and his people have asserted themselves on the Bellville site and now are effectively managing the entrance and access to that site. We're keen to discuss this with Home Affairs. We did present ourselves at the meeting last week with SAPS and the other agencies to talk about this. That meeting was postponed. We'll be at the next one, and we'll have to find some kind of solution to deal with the thuggery that is going on there. It's unfortunately the same individual that did the same thing at the Methodist Church. So I suspect some kind of criminal justice intervention is now appropriate. And considering his actions and his supporters, extradition might actually, or repatriation might actually now be on the cards because they're starting to violate all kinds of other laws. I'm not sure that a reintegration into the communities where they came from in October last year is all that feasible anymore.
Yeah. So the question is, how does that actually happen? How do we allow somebody to take control of a camp that's been set up by the City of Cape Town and our government? So what's your interventions when it comes to dealing with a person like that?
We have been managing the Wingfield site continuously, but we are not responsible for the Bellville site. So with respect, we did ask national government not to erect that site there. It was not a good idea to split the deployment, because that means we have to split services. We're incurring very significant costs at Wingfield, and it's a little bit unfair to load all these things on local government. We're also at other various homeless sites, several of which are currently still running, at Kulenborg, the extension, the Payne City site. We are incurring a huge amount of cost from COVID, and it is crippling. Yeah. We're being mocked by some of the political parties for the cost we're incurring and criticized by them. There is a limit to how much we can absorb. There is a letter now from Treasury that suggests to the Department of Home Affairs that they explore with us what additional resources are needed. Then perhaps we can also roll out access control there. But the cost of this is spiraling, and we have to maintain control of that by confining ourselves to what our legal and constitutional mandate says. We get these very nasty letters from Treasury that says, don't exceed your mandate, do not spend money on things you're not constitutionally entitled to do, similar to the letter that DHA got. So we believe firmly that this is DHA's responsibility, sir.
So Minister, JP says they're not responsible for the Bellville site. Who is then? And was that your idea at all?
Well, look, when he started the meeting, he said he doesn't want to go back to the scruples of what happened in the past. The Bellville site was set in as a matter of emergency. Remember, Shahan, when disaster was declared, it was no longer desirable for anybody to be in that church, or for anybody to be around police station, or for anybody, for that matter, to be around streets. Remember, even the homeless people of South Africa were removed from all over the country and taken to places of safety. So that Bellville site was open for that, because people were just sitting in the church and in the open. You are aware that they were sitting ducks for COVID. So that's why I said all the movements were done in terms of the disaster regulations. And as you are aware, all the sites where people who have got nowhere to stay were moved all over the country, not only in Western Cape, in terms of disaster regulations. They were done so by local government all over the country.
So you guys are disagreeing on who should take responsibility of this camp, and it's led to thuggery, as JP calls it. I mean, both of you are in local and national governments. Can you not reach a conclusion so that it doesn't spiral out of control, which is what we see actually happening now?
I'm not sure what is spiraling out of control. I hear of JP Balus having taken over a tent, and it was raised today in the meeting, and I didn't have time to respond to it because we're given a very short time. JP Balus is in Portsmouth prison. He's sitting there in prison. He has been sitting there. If you remember, he attacked the judicial officers when last he appeared in court, and that was as early as March this year, before COVID-19. And since that time, he has been sitting in jail. So this story of him having taken over a camp is actually confusing me.
So JP, just explain to me the conditions, right? Because now you're saying that you're not responsible for it. The minister says you are actually, given the national disaster guidelines. What happens then to the people who are living there? Because this looks like it's a political squabble, and at the end of the day, human beings are being affected.
Shahan, with respect, it's only a political squabble if you haven't opened the Constitution or the Refugee or the Disaster or the Refugee Act. Those pieces of legislation are very clear about who is responsible for this. The city has some very mundane responsibilities, like environmental health. We check the environmental health there. Our environmental health officials are there all the time. We've served notices on the Department of Public Works who placed the tent in terms of the environmental health problems. These petty matters, as per our bylaws, these we're attending to. That's all the court order, in fact, says, is that the city must attend to its bylaws, and that we're doing, such as they're handicapped by the court ruling and otherwise. The rest of the thing is quite clearly national government's competency. What will happen here, though, is that they will drag their feet until it becomes impossible for us to avoid. And that is what is happening with many of these problems, whether it's rail enforcement, gang enforcement, or many of these issues. And that loads one cost and one struggle after the other on municipal costs, which are becoming intolerable to bear. But I can see that what will happen in the end is that we will have little choice to address this, which is why we're attending the exit plan meeting. Hopefully, national government brings the lockdown to a conclusion on the 15th of November. We are meant to have the exit strategy in place. If DHA attends the next meeting, which is imminent, I think next week, then we can resolve many of those issues, agree on how that exit plan is implemented. The minister committed himself to one of two options. Either people are going to reintegrate or they're going to be repatriated. We must now resolve how that is made to happen and then close these two sites forthwith, not later than the 15th of November or very, very soon thereafter, sir. City is very committed to doing this. We'll do everything in our power to help and make it happen.
Yeah, it's a shame that this is unfolding this way, isn't it? So, Minister, what's the reality for these refugees who are obviously not going to be taken to other countries, who still don't want to go to their home countries? How do you reintegrate them when it's basically a hands-off approach and they say, we're not doing what you want us to do, and you say, we're not doing what you want us to do?
I'm not sure what you mean by hands-up approach, Shahan, and I'm not sure what is that which I'm discussing with JP Smith. Shahan, you also are a South African, you read the rules. I've just informed you that all the people who were moved there were moved in terms of disaster regulations, as was any other human being who did not have any home or accommodation. All over the country, all over South Africa, they've been moved away. Homeless people, whoever had no accommodation, they've been moved to some place of safety or the other. All that was done under disaster regulations. Disaster regulations are under COGTA, as you know. That's why they are passed by Minister Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. And then from there, the local authorities take over. That is the part I was outlining to you.
No, Minister, now, I think you had a break in transmission or something, because that was not my question or what I was saying. I was saying, what's happening to the refugees who are refusing to be repatriated to their home countries, who are only saying that they want to be taken to other countries? How do you reintegrate them into our society if that's the stance they are taking? I've moved on from this spat between you and JP.
Well, they will have to answer that question, because then some form of force might have to be used, because remember, even today, United Nations reiterated the fact that it's not the responsibility of South African government to move somebody to a third country. It's the responsibility of United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And they say in this case, they are not going to do it. They reiterated, and they've done so in writing in the past. And even today, they've reiterated that they are not going to move anybody to any third world country. I mean, to any third country, sorry. Not third world country, but to any other country of resettlement. They call them countries of resettlement. They are not going to do that. Now, that leaves only one option. And the option is that we reintegrate. If they then say, no, we are not reintegrating either, then the parliament said then they must be taken back from where they came from. UN said if you do that, it will be called refoulement. I asked them a question today. If that is the case, what option do they then leave us? So we might have to go to the courts of law to ask about options. What do you do if somebody is causing a stalemate, is refusing to move? You give 3 different options, all of them are rejected. What then do you do? Maybe the courts will have to come and settle that finally.
Yeah, so you're going to have to go back to court to settle this matter. It is obviously a problem, and it's a very sensitive issue, isn't it, Minister and JP? JP, I want to give the last question to you before we say goodbye to the two of you. What does the city do in the interim pending this back and forth with these refugees? And do you have the funds to actually sustain this for much longer?
No, sir. Remember when I don't think any of us anticipated the lockdown lasting as long as it did. So the COVID expenses are causing municipalities all over South Africa to be in serious trouble. Many municipalities are in situations where they're struggling to pay staff and other stuff, because remember also our rates income has diminished sharply. And I think in April alone, we suffered a 270 million rand reduction in income from residents who just couldn't pay. So there is less money and more expenses. So we are having to cut budgets on all kinds of other items. We can't sustain this indefinitely. We are incurring continuing costs. We don't mind. We understand the humanitarian grants and we'll do it, but it has to come to a conclusion. The lockdown, when the lockdown ends, that should be the conclusion. And I agree with the Minister that he's faced with a very thorny issue around what do you do with people who refuse to reintegrate. They don't want to go and find their own way. They want special treatment. They want to be accommodated in special accommodation or otherwise. And that doesn't exist in South African law. There isn't a category for home recipients for refugees in this regard. So we'll absolutely sustain the services. We're not being impossible. But at some point, some conclusion is going to have to be reached by DHA. They'll have to decide what to do with individuals, especially at the Pain City site or the Bellville site, who are intransigent and are actually making it very difficult. They're hostile, they're aggressive during discussions, and they're making it very difficult to come to an amicable solution.
All right, thank you both so much for your time. We appreciate it. That was JP Smith, member of the Mayoral Committee for Safety and Security in Cape Town, and Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi.